Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the Daily News Analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featuring in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for understanding from the UPSC examination point of view. So let's start our today's discussion by taking the important articles which feature in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. So let's take up our first article for the day. The first article which appears in the newspaper reads, COP27 forms Loss and Damage Fund, new panel to decide its structure. Now this particular article features in the newspaper because, as we have discussed earlier, the much talked about COP27 summit or the climate change summit has come to an end, and a significant development has happened where the much talked about Loss and Damage Fund has been established finally, and now further actions would be taken on this fund. So it's a good news that the Loss and Damage Fund has been, first the good news was that at least the discussion was added to the agenda when the meeting, the climate change conference was about to start, and now this Loss and Damage Fund has been approved. So from this COP27, the takeaway is the Loss and Damage Fund, and from our examination point of view, we will understand what exactly is this Loss and Damage Fund and what are its developments that have happened and what are some of the issues that remain with respect to this fund. So when we talk about the Loss and Damage Fund, what exactly is this Loss and Damage Fund? It refers to the costs that the rich and developed countries who are majorly responsible for industrial emissions that pollute the environment, and they should pay to the poorer nations that have made negligible contribution to the pollution but are more vulnerable to extreme climate events. Right, we had discussed the Loss and Damage Fund in our session on 17th September. So on a more detailed discussion, you can tune into that edition of the Daily News Analysis. But as we understood from here, the Loss and Damage Fund is a very crucial aspect to ensure climate justice, because as we saw, this phenomena of climate change or global warming started from the time of Industrial Revolution, where the emission of carbon dioxide increased from much more than the normal amounts, and this led to warming of the planet, and this is the major reason for climate change. So it was seen that the perpetrators or the causers of this climate change were the rich and developed countries, but the effect of this climate change, the people who are facing this effect are basically the least developed or the developing nations. These are the nations, especially which are the coastal nations, who are facing the brunt of the sea level rise, are facing all the problems of climate change. So we saw an example of the Vanuatu Islands. This island also brought this term as a demand in 1991, because it was the country which was, despite being a carbon neutral or even a country which emits less carbon than it is sequestrating or absorbing, even after that this country was facing the brunt of climate change. That is how the call for Loss and Damage Fund and for the rich and developed countries to compensate these poorer countries started, and finally in the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, which happened, which took place, that is the COP27, this Loss and Damage Fund was accepted. And the data also backs us over here, where we saw that between 1751 and 2017, 47% of the CO2 emissions came from the US and the 28 European nations. So in all, just 29 countries were majorly responsible in the initial period of time to emit such high amounts of carbon dioxide and cause the phenomenon of climate change. So here is therefore the good news that this particular fund has now been established. So this means that this particular fact is officially now accepted, that there were some countries who were responsible for climate change, and there is a disproportionate impact which is been causing on the other smaller nations or the least developed nations who are facing the brunt of the damage. So now what does this Loss and Damage Fund say? This Loss and Damage Fund is also similar to the polluter pays principle. Right? If we recollect, this principle is also enshrined in the Indian environment laws, wherein we see it in the electronic waste rules, where if the manufacturer of the electronic item is the one responsible for selling the item, he is also responsible for recollecting the item from the market, or if any manufacturer is causing any damage to the environment, he should pay for its damage. So the polluter pays principle, it is very similar to and is enshrined in the loss and damage fund, and the most important purpose for loss and damage fund is to work as a deterrent, which means that if those countries which are emitting high amounts of carbon dioxide are having to pay or compensate the poorer countries or those countries who are facing the damage, it would work as a deterrent for these countries to lessen their carbon dioxide emissions. So this is the background with respect to the loss and damage fund. And now what would be the corpus of this fund? The corpus, or the expected monetary compensation from this fund, is estimated to be nearly $500 billion, which is going to rise by $200 billion annually. This high an amount is going to be is expected as a form of monetary compensation, and this is because we have data that a report by 55 vulnerable countries estimated to their combined climate-linked losses over the last 2 decades totaled 525 billion, or 20% of their collective GDP. And some research suggests that by 2030, such losses could reach $580 billion per year. So the report by these 55 vulnerable countries actually showcase that due to the climate change impact, and the adverse impact of climate change is seen in various sectors such as the agriculture of the country, the industries, the problem of climate refugees, where people are not able to find habitable places in regions where climate change has caused significant impact. So when all of these losses are calculated in economic terms, they came to be around $525 billion, and that is why the loss and damage fund is going to have an expected corpus of about $500 billion, which is going to rise by $200 billion annually. Therefore, this is a significant step towards climate justice. So all of this can be called as the merit of the loss and damage fund, that yes, first the issue was at least brought into the mainstream, and now this issue has officially been accepted, and a dedicated fund towards compensating those poorer and countries which are facing the brunt of the climate change are going to receive money as compensation, and therefore they will be able to better battle the impact of climate change. But are there some of the issues with respect to this loss and damage fund? There are certainly some of the issues which are lingering with respect to fund, is that no agreement yet over what should count as the loss and damage that is caused by the climate change has been entered until now. This means that even though the fund has been set up, there is no agreement over what should count as loss and damage. So who will define loss and damage? That aspect is still remaining. Then no agreement over who will pay. Now who is going to pay to this loss and damage fund? That is also not been decided. So we see that these are some of the fundamental questions that are yet unanswered. And then vulnerable countries and campaigners in the past have argued that rich countries that cause the bulk with their historical greenhouse gas emissions should be the one to pay, right? But the mechanism of selecting which member countries are going to pay, that has not been entered into that yet. Because there are various conflicts between them, where we can say that the United States and European Union have resisted the argument because they fear spiraling liabilities. This means that the acceptance of the liability, that it was their fault which caused this high phenomenon of climate change, it would result into spiraling liabilities, or liabilities much more than the loss and damage fund, where once they accept that they were responsible, various other collateral damages and complications would also occur. That is why they are scared of it, and they are also conflicting that countries such as China, who at this point is the maximum greenhouse gas emitter, is not a developing country, should not be classified as a developing country, and should also be included in the loss and damage fund. Therefore, who is going to pay to this fund still remains an issue. And crucial questions such as who will manage this fund. So we don't know whether what would be counted as loss and damage, what would be the criteria, who will be paying to that fund, then who will be managing that fund, whether contributions are expected from large developing countries, and what the fair share of contributors will be. All of these questions are yet unanswered, and therefore, yes, even though the step is good, these crucial questions need to be answered. And what is the summit said? That a transitional committee is going to be set up that would make recommendations for the adoptions of the fund at the next conference of the parties of the UNFCCC, which is going to take place in the UAE in 2023. So all of these questions have been now delegated to a transitional committee which would try to answer these questions. What would be loss and damage, who will pay, how much is the share going to be? All of these questions is going to be decided by this transitional committee, and it has 1 year until the next edition of the COP28. The parties meet in UAE in 2023. So this was our information background and the implications with respect to the loss and damage fund. We finished this article and let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, Great Knot Sighting Untangles a Migration Mystery. Now, this particular article appears in the newspaper because a migratory bird known as the Great Knot, which usually resides in the Siberian region of Russia, this has traveled all the way to India and never ever has the Great Knot sighted in India. This is the second instance of sighting of this particular migratory bird in India, and this has been sighted in the coasts of Kerala. That is why it's a very significant news, and from this aspect we'll analyze what this migratory bird is all about, what's so special about it, and the article mentions that this Great Knot traveled through the Central Asian Flyway. Now, what exactly are these flyways and how useful are they for these birds to migrate from one region to another? And we all know that the migratory distance is huge, where these birds starts migrating from the North Pole, Siberian region, and they come all the way to India, and this Great Knot even goes to the region of Australia. So we'll try to understand what this concept of flyways is all about, and what are the flyways which are important for India and intersect from in the Indian region. This is important from the examination point of view, so we'll take a look at that. This is the Great Knot, which has been seen in Kerala for the second time. It belongs to the endangered Calidris tenuirostis and is found its way to Kerala's coast, flying over 9,000 kilometers for a winter sojourn, which means that whenever winter strikes in the Siberian region, the bird starts to migrate. And recently, many juvenile Great Knots have been tagged with the Moskva rings in the Kamchatka Peninsula in the eastern Russia. So how did the scientists come to know that this is a bird from Russia? So as we can see in the article, this is a Moskva ring, or a name tag, or an identification tag, one can say, which was attached to the bird, and that's how the researchers came to know that this bird has traveled all the way from Russia. So let's understand few things about the Great Knot, which is an international migratory wading bird that travels vast distances between the northern hemisphere breeding grounds and southern hemisphere summer feeding grounds. So it breeds in the northern hemisphere and feeds in the southern hemisphere. So its distribution is across the Siberian region, where it occurs around coastal areas in many parts of Australia during the southern summer. So the Great Knots migrate all the way to the region of Australia. They breed in eastern Siberia, from where it has come from recently, and when on migration they occur throughout coastal regions of Eastern and Southeast Asia. Therefore, the sighting has happened in coast of Kerala. And talking about their habitat, in Australia, the Great Knots inhabit intertidal mudflats and sand flats in sheltered coasts, including bays, harbors and estuaries. Generally, the migratory birds, since they want a good feeding ground, they would regularly be seen in the wetland regions, in the estuaries regions, in the coastal regions, where there's plenty of fishes available and food available for them. So these are the normal, therefore, habitat range for the bird. Now let's talk about these flyways. Now, what are these flyways? As we can see from the map, these are those regions which the birds use to travel as per their migratory path. So it is a geographical region within which a single or a group of migratory species completes its annual cycle, that is breeding, molting, staging and non-breeding. So the distance that is traveled and the whole journey that the migratory birds take forward and whatever region they cover, that is known as a flyway. So as we can see from the picture, how many of the flyways intersect in the Indian region? So there are 9 flyways in total. One is the East Asian Australasian Flyway, one is the Central Asian Flyway, next is the East African West Asian Flyway, then is the Black Sea Mediterranean Flyway, Atlantic Americas Flyway, East Atlantic Flyway, Mississippi Americas Flyway, and the Pacific Americas Flyway. So those flyways which intersect with the Indian subcontinent region are the East Asian Australasian Flyway, Central Asian Flyway, and the East African West Asian Flyway. These 3 flyways are the flyways which fall in the geographical region of the Indian subcontinent and are therefore important for us. Now let's understand that India, what has India done for these flyways? Why are these flyways important? These flyways are significant because 1 in 5 of the world's 11,000 bird species migrate, which means that significant population of the birds migrate, covering enormous distances. Therefore, conserving these migratory birds requires cooperation and coordination along the entire flyway. So it's a matter of coordination and cooperation between various countries, and safeguarding flyways means protecting the birds from poachers, rejuvenating wetlands among others, and saving the wetlands terrestrial habitats, helping fulfilling the bigger purpose of saving an entire ecosystem as well. So that is how flyways become important, and India has a national action plan for conservation of migratory birds, and under this at least 370 species of the migratory birds from 3 flyways, that is the Central Asian Flyway, East Asian Australasian Flyway, and the Asian East African Flyway. The three flyway which we saw are intersecting in the Indian region are reported to visit the Indian subcontinent during their annual cycle. So this particular bird, great knot, travel via the Central Asian Flyway. So let's understand few things about the Central Asian Flyway. It covers a large area of Eurasia between the Arctic and the Indian Ocean. This is the region completely captures India, starts from the Arctic and reaches up till the Indian Ocean. And including India, there are 30 countries under the Central Asian Flyway. It extends from the northernmost breeding grounds from Siberia to southernmost non-breeding grounds in the West and South Asia, the Maldives, and the British Indian Ocean Territory. So this is the extent of the Central Asian Flyway. This was the important information with respect to this article. We finished the discussion today, and we'll meet again next time with the important articles from the newspaper. Thank you.